In the headlines this hour, President Park Geun-hye nominates a former journalist as her new prime minister and the ambassador to Japan as her new intelligence chief. The trial begins for the captain and crew who were in charge of navigating the Sewol ferry that sank and left more than 300 passengers dead or missing. And a 1962 Japanese Foreign Ministry report shows that Tokyo had concluded that it did not have enough legal ground to bring its claim over Dokdo Island to the International Court of Justice.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. Following days of speculation, President Park Geun-hye has tapped a career journalist to be her new prime minister and a career diplomat to head the intelligence agency. Tuesday's nominations are expected to accelerate the president's reform drive. Choi Yoo-sun has this report.
On Tuesday, the presidential office announced that Moon Chang-guk, the former editor-in-chief of the JoongAng Daily and head of the Korea News Editors Association, had been nominated as the new prime minister. The presidential spokesperson said the nominee's integrity as a journalist was highly valued, as the new prime minister will be the one leading government restructuring and instituting sweeping reforms in the aftermath of April's ferry disaster.
With this remarkable insight and driving force, the nominee is expected to push forward with reforms in public service and rooting out wrongful practices in our society.
Tuesday's nomination comes nearly 2 weeks after President Park's first nominee An Dae-hee withdrew amid controversy over his post-retirement earnings. Since An's resignation, the presidential office is known to have tightened the personnel verification process and focused on finding a reform-minded figure with ethical integrity. As for the head of the National Intelligence Service, current ambassador to Japan Lee Byung-gi was named. The career diplomat's working style and deep understanding of intelligence and security at home and abroad were cited in his nomination.
The nominee is considered the right person to fulfill the intelligence agency's duties and carry out reforms amid current tensions between the two Koreas.
Now that a new prime minister nominee has been named, the much-anticipated reshuffles within the cabinet and presidential office are expected to gain momentum and will likely take place after President Park returns from a trip to Central Asia next week. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News.
Now, what highlighted the need for the cabinet reshuffle and reform drive at this point is the practice of collusive ties between the government and the industries that they're supposed to regulate. And while changes are promised at this point, they are being met with resistance from special interest groups. Kim Myung-gil explains.
Retired bureaucrats in Korea have long enjoyed the luxury of finding employment in firms and organizations that have direct links to their former posts. President Park Geun-hye's first choice for new Prime Minister An Dae-hee ran into trouble for that very reason, withdrawing his nomination last month after it was revealed he made some $1.5 million as a lawyer in less than 6 months, after retiring as a former Supreme Court justice. President Park has vowed to end the era of cozy ties between bureaucrats and the industries and companies they regulate, and has pledged reforms. But the changes are not coming easily. The revised Public Service Ethics Act of 2011 states that the government's Public Ethics Committee must screen any former high-ranking government official that wants to work at a company or public institution. But the act exempts lawyers, certified public accountants, and tax accountants from the screening process. There have been calls to close the loophole, but in a recent pre-announcement of revised legislation, the three groups are still exempt.
The government needs to submit the revised Public Service Ethics Act to the National Assembly so that we can deliberate on it and make changes to the necessary clauses.
Opposition party lawmakers on the Parliamentary Public Administration Committee say they have been trying to have the clause removed, only to be met with resistance from related interest groups. Although President Park had vocalized a strong will to end the close ties between the government and the industries they are meant to oversee, legislation that would impose greater restrictions on the practice remains in limbo. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
The much-anticipated trial of the captain and crew who fled the sinking Sewol ferry back in April began on this Tuesday. And as our Connie Kim reports, the first day of hearings was very much emotionally charged.
The first day of trial for the 15 crew members accused of fleeing the sinking ship focused on whether some, including the captain, would be found guilty of murder by willful negligence. And the rest are charged with negligence that led to the death of hundreds of people.
If the murder out of willful negligence is to be upheld, the causal relationship must be proved that passengers died because the crew members did not rescue them, although they were aware of the dangers of death the passengers faced.
The captain has denied the murder charges, saying that possible rescue steps were carried out during the sinking and that he had been rescued after no further rescue efforts were possible. Lee requested through his public lawyer that his charges be reviewed. The prosecution used video footage and communication logs between the ferry and the vessel control tower as evidence to back their case. And during the trial, there were some emotional moments, with the prosecutor on the verge of tears at one point while reading the charges and some victims' families visibly shaken. 2 to 3 more of these trial sessions will be held with no dates set yet. The verdict is due out at least before November, when the arrest period for the crew members are terminated. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
New evidence has emerged that shows that the Japanese government had acknowledged decades ago that its claims to Dokdo Island were not worth taking to the International Court of Justice, as it's trying to do at this point. Yurian has the details.
A secret government report dating back to 1962 shows Japan knew back then that its claim to the Korea-controlled Dokdo Island was not a case that could be brought to the International Court of Justice. In the report recently released by a civic group in Japan, Tokyo's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the Dokdo issue cannot be categorized as an international dispute, as it arose before Japan announced its compulsory jurisdiction over the island in 1958. The document added that territorial disputes only apply between countries that claim compulsory jurisdiction, but since Korea did not, it said the Dokdo issue cannot be deemed a territorial dispute. The transcript of a closed-door meeting between the then director of the Central Intelligence Agency of Korea, Kim Jong-pil, and former Japanese Prime Minister Hayato Ikeda in 1952 has also been made public. Ikeda told Kim that the issue should be left alone, since Korea is effectively in control of Dokdo Island.
This document proves Japan is making its claim while it knew from the very beginning that it was completely unjust.
The civic group wants to bring lawsuits against the Japanese government to make public documents related to bilateral talks between Korea and Japan to bring light to historical facts. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
South Korea has given a German needle company the green light to open up shop at the Inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex. Seoul's Unification Ministry announced today that Grotz Beckert submitted an application last week asking to supply needles to textile factories operating in the park. It will mark the first time for a foreign company to do business in the complex. The ministry said 2 foreign manufacturers also showed interest in opening up factories there, but did add that concerns about the stability of the factory zone seems to be holding them back. South Korea on Monday proposed a meeting with North Korean officials on June 19th to discuss the management of the complex, but no answer from North Korea just yet. An attorney representing an American who was recently detained in North Korea says his client was on vacation in North Korea and not there for religious purposes. Jeffrey Fowl was reportedly arrested in North Korea last month for leaving a Bible in his hotel room. In a short statement Monday, Mr. Fowl's attorney said his client loves to travel and that his family was anxious for him to come back. It also said Fowl's family thanks the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang for its ongoing efforts to secure his release. With Mr. Fowl now in custody, there are now 3 U.S. citizens being held in North Korea.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. Korean singer Psy is back, and has he done it again? Gangnam Style took the world by storm 2 summers ago, and his latest track, Hangover, has burst out of the gate since being released only yesterday. Shin Se-min tells us more.
14 million viewers and counting. In less than 1 day, Psy's new music video Hangover has certainly garnered interest on YouTube. It features Psy and American hip-hop artist Snoop Dogg delving into Korea's unique drinking culture and shows them visiting a singing room, drinking hangover remedies, visiting a sauna, and of course, downing soju and beer. Any success with this video will be judged against the one that broke Psy out as an international star in 2012. Since it was released, Gangnam Style has racked up over 2 billion views on YouTube, earning the title as the most watched clip of all time on the video sharing site. And according to the British magazine The Economist, the time spent by all of us watching that video could have been used for other pursuits. The time spent watching the 4-minute, 12-second video over 2 billion times equals 140 million hours or 16,000 years. Had Gangnam Style viewers not been watching the video, The Economist says they could have built 3 ships or constructed 20 Empire State Buildings. Will we be talking about Hangover in the same way in a few years? Only time will tell, but Psy isn't resting on his laurels. He will release another single called Daddy this summer. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Korea's mounting household debt issue is back in the headlines. Household loans extended by local financial institutions hit a record high for the 3rd straight month in April. The Bank of Korea said Tuesday that the figure stood at around $680 billion as of the end of the month, up nearly $5 billion from March. But the bank tempered concerns over the level of household debt, saying the rise stems from strong home transactions, which exceeded the 92,000 mark in April, up by around 3,000 from a month earlier. The have-nots in this country are getting poorer by the day. The wealth gap between the middle class and the poor has widened to nearly double the size it was 20 years ago. Statistics Korea said Tuesday that the country's so-called relative poverty rate of households in Korea's urban areas stood at 14.5% last year. That means more than 1 out of every 10 city households earns less than half of what middle-income households earn each year. In 1993, the rate stood at around 8%. It had topped 10% after the Asian financial crisis in the late 90s and briefly peaked at over 15% after the global financial crisis of 2009. Hundreds of Korean credit card and banking executives are staring down the barrel of severe disciplinary actions for mismanagement. According to the Financial Supervisory Service on Tuesday, that the list includes about 300 people. Some of them are the chiefs of large financial firms like KB Kookmin Bank, Citi Korea, and Shinhan. The executives are being held accountable for various financial troubles at the institutions, which includes a massive data leak last year and illegal loans. The scope of the disciplinary actions will be decided on June 26th. Officials say they've never had this many people facing disciplinary action in one single case before. Violinist Park Geun-hye is without a doubt one of Korea's musical legends, and ARIRANG's Park Ji-won sat down with her to talk about her 5 decades in the classical music business.
Korean classical music legend Park Geun-hye, who has been leading a successful career spanning nearly 50 years, recalls her first encounter with the violin.
What I loved about the violin when I started when I was 6 was the freedom. I felt that the instrument was very intimate, and it also presented a voice. And so from then on, it became very pure fascination for me.
Since winning the Leventree competition in 1967 at the age of 19, she has become one of the world's first Asian classical musicians to reach star status on the global stage. She also shared part of her music career in the Chung Trio, along with her sister cellist Chung Myung-hwa and brother maestro conductor Chung Myung-hoon.
I had a very, very busy career until I had 2 children. I was very lucky to have this active career as a young performer.
She's been hailed by fans and music critics alike for her passionate yet delicate playing that could resonate with almost any period of classical music, from Bach and Beethoven to modern composers like Stravinsky. She says her Guarnerius violin, which she acquired in 1983, is her voice.
This instrument is so human. Once I've been in touch with Guarnerius, there is nothing that comes closer to my soul than this instrument.
In 2005, she suffered a finger injury. Thinking her violin playing days were over, she began teaching at Juilliard and co-directing the Great Mountains Music Festival. By 2010, her finger healed, allowing her to fully return to playing on international stages and in charity concerts, such as the one she will perform at the Sewol Arts Center this Friday.
I started as a dream of having a big solo career, but it's not a single voice I am looking for now. It is harmonious voice. Unless we care for each other and find the voice of each other and tune it together, we will not find the harmony.
In addition to her China tour in October, Chung will also play at the Royal Festival Hall in London on December 2nd, on the stage where her international career took off. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Let's kick things off in Pakistan, where another violent attack has erupted near the country's busiest airport in the city of Karachi. Paul, fill us in.
Well, details are still unclear at this point. What we do know is that a fierce gun battle has been taking place since Tuesday morning at the Pakistani Airport Security Force Academy. Officials say the training academy went under fire after several heavily armed men pulled up in a vehicle near Karachi's airport. There have been no confirmed casualties or wounded, but reports say dozens of ambulances were rushed to the scene. According to local media, the militants were unable to penetrate the perimeter of the main airport complex and have now been surrounded by security forces. Authorities say all flights in and out of the sprawling city of 18 million have been suspended until further notice. It was not immediately clear who was behind the latest attack, but it comes less than 48 hours after an all-night siege by the Pakistani Taliban that killed at least 35 people. Just hours before the renewed violence, the Pakistani military launched airstrikes against suspected hideouts of the terrorist group near the Afghan border.
So certainly a developing story there. And shifting our focus a bit to the Middle East now, Iraq is also experiencing a wave of attacks from insurgents this past week as the government is struggling to hold control of the country. Paul, so where is the concentration of the most recent fighting?
Well, hundreds of gunmen have overrun Iraq's second largest city of Mosul in the north of the country, seizing provincial government buildings and other key facilities. The major offensive began late last night, following days of deadly bombings across the country. Iraqi police and army troops were forced to retreat as the militant forces fought back with rocket-propelled grenades, sniper rifles, and machine guns. They were also able to take control of a nearby airport, TV stations, and a high-security prison where some 1,000 inmates were reportedly freed. No one has so far claimed responsibility, but the fighters are suspected to be part of an al-Qaeda splinter group called the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. The Iraqi government in Baghdad says the city has been lost to terrorists and is requesting military reinforcements. According to Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, there was also heavy fighting across Iraq's western Anbar province over the weekend. Militants also stormed a university campus in the provincial capital of Ramadi, taking hundreds of students and their professors hostage. Recent figures from the United Nations show almost 800 Iraqis, including over 600 civilians, were killed in violent attacks last month.
I see. Now, riot police and protesters clashed for a fifth day now in Brazil, with less than 3 days to go before the host country kicks off the opening match of the World Cup this time. So a very uneasy start of the games, Paul, with public sentiment very much divided over this event.
That's right. The final countdown has begun for the 2014 FIFA World Cup, but the mood is so far from joyous in Sao Paulo, as protests against the tournament are leaving many with a sour taste in their mouths. And just earlier today, a worker was killed during the construction of a monorail, which is one of the many projects yet to be completed. Our Connie Lee gives us an overview of the situation in the Latin American country.
In Brazil's biggest city of Sao Paulo, metro workers entered their fifth day of protests on Monday, even after a court ruled their strike illegal. Riot police armed with tear gas had to confront the striking workers, who have reduced their demands to a 12% pay raise, lower than the previous 35%. Major subway lines have been closed since last Thursday, causing chaos, traffic jams, and uncertainty just days before the World Cup.
I think it's wrong. This shows how Brazil is. We do not have organization. We don't have anything, no patience. This is a country that will host the World Cup. Congratulations.
The city's mayor says officials are making every effort to end the strike.
We are seeking the solution not just for the upcoming big event, but as a right of the workers of Sao Paulo to have a judicial decision fulfilled so that normalcy can return to the city.
Leading up to the World Cup, the metro strike is just the latest in a string of protests by public workers. In Rio de Janeiro, outside a World Cup media center, teachers protested and rallied. Using the backdrop of international attention and the tens of billions of dollars spent by Brazil's government on the tournament, public workers have been demanding large pay raises. Thousands of other city employees, including police and bus drivers in different host cities, have also gone on strike in the weeks leading up to the World Cup. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
And finally, we turn to the U.S., where the world's oldest man has died at the age of 111. Paul, can you give us a brief look at his life?
Well, Alexander Imik, the world's certified oldest man, passed away in his sleep at home in the Upper West Side in New York City, according to friends and family. The Polish immigrant was born at the turn of the century in 1903. The Holocaust survivor lost most of his family in Nazi concentration camps during World War II. But in the 1940s, he and his wife were able to escape from a Soviet gulag to the U.S., where he worked as a chemist for most of his life. Imik was one of 76 supercentenarians worldwide. That's people who lived beyond 110 years, of which only 3 were men. The oldest woman, Masao Okawa, is 116 and lives in Japan. When asked about his amazing longevity, Imik said he never drank and credited good genes for his long life. Cherry?
So good genes and no drinking, very much well noted there. Thank you very much for that report, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. Now let's check on weather conditions with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. So it did rain a couple of hours ago right here in Seoul. How are we doing now?
Well, Teddy, things have cleared up in Seoul at the moment, but we're looking at more precipitation accompanied by stormy conditions in the central regions. Well, at the moment, some regions are seeing stormy conditions and even hail because the nation is at the edge of a high-pressure system from the East Sea. Unstable atmospheric conditions should continue through later tonight, leading to more rainfall and even stormy conditions. We're looking at about 5 to 40 millimeters of precipitation, so please be careful behind the wheel. And we won't be done with rainfall just yet because we're looking at another 5 to 40 millimeters of precipitation tomorrow. So it really looks like it's time for us to get out the rain boots. Taking a closer look at tomorrow's readings, Sewol starts off the morning at 19 degrees before reaching 28 in the afternoon, while cities down south make it to the mid-20s. Let's see how other regions are looking. Daejeon makes it to 27 degrees and less than a millimeter of rainfall is forecast there in the afternoon, while Jeju peaks at 23, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out at 18. And that's all the updates I have for Korea, and here's a look at the international weather.
And that does it for this edition of ARIRANG News at 8. Thanks for watching.